What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And Faythreehundred. Normally, this would go on the reaction channel, and I actually thought about that, but I want to have a bit of a bigger conversation. So I'm going to address some of the stuff that Faythreehundred said in his No Jumper interview. But I think there's a little bit more to that as well. So, for one, this is a perfect example of the challenge that entertainers face when they're trying to put on for themselves and for their art and what they got going on, but also represent something bigger than themselves, right? Whether it's a gang or a city or whatever it may be. Because when people aren't really familiar with folks from your section, you become the example, right? And people just assume that whatever your get down is, that is a representation of your community. And I can assure you that Faythreehundred was not a great representation of Fresno as a whole, or even the Bulldogs as a whole. And I want to be clear up front that I'm not here to disrespect the Bulldogs. I'm not here to disrespect the city of Fresno. I'm not here to disrespect anybody. I'm not here to disrespect Faythreehundred, right? I think he is talented. I think he's going places. He's a young man who went on a platform to, like I said, to put on for who he is and what he does and his get down. And that's great. But that's also the most that, a lot of people have ever heard somebody from Fresno talk. And I've said before, I don't have a lot of experience with the Bulldogs incarcerated. That doesn't mean I'm ignorant about Fresno or that I don't have, have those connections to Bulldogs now. I just didn't really do time with them because of the split. It's not how it worked. But nonetheless, I'm going to address three things in this, right? And the first is the statement that's getting a lot of attention, right? The whole, man, we brothers. And he didn't use the word brother, but I don't use the N-word really in my vocabulary anymore. And I say anymore because that was normal, right? Where I grew up. I'm from the Bay Area, and it very much was a diverse environment, right? There was Raza, there was brothers, there was Polynesians, there was Asians. Like, I'm very comfortable around different racial and ethnic groups. And that's just how we came up, right? And it's very much a hybrid culture of sorts, which is true really for any culture, is a mix of influences, but that's another conversation for another day. And so that's true to an extent in Fresno too, but I say all that, and I've never in my life heard a brown man identify the way that Faythreehundred did on No Jumper, right? And he didn't say I, he said we, right? And I think I know where he was coming from in terms of the Bulldog politics are different than the traditional or stereotypical Raza politics of gangs and communities in California, right? And to some degree has some more similarities with kind of the black street culture than it does the brown street culture. That being said, there's a rich Chicano history in Fresno, right? And there is a range of raza from Fresno. You do have a lot of young folks in particular that talk and dress like Faythreehundred do, right? Like, that's why I say I'm not putting him down. He's representing a segment of his generation, but that is not how all Bulldogs behave and act. And I don't think that there are many Bulldogs, in particular some of the older ones, that would agree with that statement that he made. So again, I think he said it to get attention. I think I know what he meant. I don't know Faythreehundred, but I sort of get where he was going with it. But that didn't come out right. Or maybe it came out exactly how he wanted, and in which case, you just pissed off a whole lot of people in Fresno, right? It's interesting because he shouts out a bunch of people in his video, right, in his interview, and yet I know for a fact that some of those very people that he's shouting out are not thrilled with having their name attached to what he did, right? And that's their own stuff. They get down their own way, so I'm not trying to put too much on that, right? But that's the reality, and it's for a couple reasons, right? That, but also that kind of leads into my next point of this idea that the Bulldogs walked away from the North, right, from the NF, because they were just tired of being abused, right? They were frontline all the time, and so they just woke up one day in '85 and decided, you know what, we don't want to be up under these guys anymore. And oh shit, man, we got a dope ass college team right here that's popping. Let's call ourselves Bulldogs. I think that's how some people feel. But that's a very much an oversimplification, right? That is a dumbing down of history right there, you know. And so I want to clarify a little bit of that from the best of my understanding and my knowledge. Yes, Fresno was a factor. Fresno is a factor, right? Let me be clear. Fresno is a factor, but Fresno was a factor then too. And in the '80s, if you took every Northerner in California that was incarcerated and you split them up by the counties and cities that they're from, Fresno would be the largest, right? For sure. That doesn't mean most Northerners were from Fresno. That means the Fresno car was deeper than any other county car and was fairly close with San Jose, right? Santa Clara County, San Jose. And so there's a history there of those two counties bumping heads and beefing. And some of that is because of the influential heavyweights, you know, that came out of those places in terms of their affiliation at the time. And some of it is just who's going to be the big man on campus. And as much as there's a real effort put towards not set tripping and no homeboy favoritism and all that other stuff, and it is taken seriously, people are people, Holmes, and it still happens, right? And so, yes, Fresno was, was a big deal, right? But there was a lot of big deals. And yes, people from Fresno were putting in work, but so were people from all over, right? It's not unique to them. There wasn't something special in the water necessarily down there. Now, I expect people from Fresno to kind of argue with that because I argue with that when it comes to the Bay Area too. But from an outside perspective, it is what it is. And Fresno was the attempt to take a prison gang and turn it into a criminal organization, right? Can we run a city? Can we basically lock down a city and own it? And Fresno was the apple of the NF's eye for a long time because you had people from Fresno that had incredible influence in the streets and had status and authority within, the prison system. And so they tried to mesh those two, which is interesting because if you let some of these folks tell it, nobody has authority with the Bulldogs, right? And so I'm going to get to that also in a second because that just historically is not true, right? But so yeah, Fresno was the attempt to do that, and there was, like I said, issues in particular from Santa Clara County and Fresno, bumping heads, and whoever was deeper on the yard would kind of throw their weight around a little bit. It happens, right? It happened in my time in prison. I'm sure it happens right now in prison, and it definitely was happening back then in prison. So Fresno was frontline. I'm not taking anything away from those individuals. And they were significant in the history of the NF prior to breaking away. But there was much more to that, right? And that leads me to another point of this idea that, Fresno just don't want to listen to nobody. They just, like I said, like they just all got up one day and decided, we don't want to listen. We want to all just do whatever the hell we want in prison. No, the creation of the Bulldogs is a product of folks from Fresno listening to somebody, right? Like this, it wasn't just everybody had the same thought at the same time. You had individuals who didn't like how things were going in their group, so they turned around and got at their home team and was like, hey, come on, man, F these dudes, we're gonna do our thing. And that created years of confusion and division and how are we rocking and who you rocking with? Are you about the Norte or are you about Fresno? And I'm not sure. And people changing their minds, they're switching up. It wasn't some clean decision, right? It took years. And that was a product of influential people from Fresno saying, hey, bro, this is how we should get down. No, this is how we should get down. This is what we should do. And over the course of time, it led to the creation of the Fresno Bulldogs and the growth of the Fresno Bulldogs as the dominant group out of Fresno, right? For sure. And so there is a history of people following direction, right? Of people listening, of minding somebody. I said it before in another video, and I think I've talked about it even on lives, but just regardless of where you're from, right? If you've done time in the state of California, no matter your race, no matter none of that shit, just think about this, right? And if you have some familiarity or you've talked to people about how prison was in California in the 80s, right? Even early 90s. The idea that a group of people are going to break away from this prison gang, right? This organization, whatever the fuck you want to call it, and just have a free-for-all. We ain't minding nobody. We ain't listening to nobody. We do whatever the hell we want. We don't hold each other accountable. We have no discipline. We have no structure. We have no guidance. We have no responsibility. Everybody just wild out and do whatever it is you feel like doing. And if somebody don't like it, they can get off where they're mad at. In a general population environment, in the California Department of Corrections in the 1980s, you would have been annihilated. You would have been destroyed by everybody, right? You couldn't operate like that in there. Nobody was going to let you get away with that, right? So initially, there was strategy and thought and discipline and accountability and all that. Now, not to the same degree as some of these other organizations, right? They definitely did it in a different way. They definitely broke the mold when it comes to, Raza gangs in prison in California, right? So I'm not taking that away from them. They did not become a carbon copy of who they broke away from, right? So there was a difference. But what you see now in 2024 and the stuff that we heard about even in the, mid to late 90s, that type of stuff, there's no way that everybody from Fresno was behaving that way in 1985, right? I wasn't in prison then, but it just doesn't make any sense. Right? They came up with agreements. They came up with understandings. And yes, there's an independent streak. And as time has gone on, and as the Bulldogs have grown, and as we've seen generational changes in kind of the caliber of people, and I'm not saying better or worse, I'm just saying different, as you do with every generation. Yes, the Bulldogs have evolved into this massive gang with a whole shit ton of hoods and all kinds of people, and a very different setup and accountability. And yes, there are places that you go where it's just kind of like, hey, well, dogs are going to do what dogs are going to do, right? And if you don't like it, deal with it, but we're going to back up our people. Again, to think that that's how everything was from jump just doesn't make any sense. And so, again, I'm not taking anything away from anybody, right? And they definitely do function different. The other thing is just to kind of clarify, there's a lot of comments about the Bulldogs being dropouts. Bulldogs are dropouts. Bulldogs are dropouts. Bulldogs are dropouts. The Bulldogs is not a dropout gang. The Bulldogs is not a S&Y gang. There are people who were Bulldogs who may still claim to be Bulldogs that are on S&Y yards, just like there's people over there that call themselves Southsiders and call themselves Northerners and call themselves, all kinds of stuff, right? And people can call themselves whatever they want to. And I'm not saying that they're not. It's whatever. I don't fucking care. But those people can't then just go to a general population yard and program up under the political structure that they're identifying with. They would get whacked. They would get removed because they would be told you're not actually a part of this group, whether you say you are or not. And so, yes, there are people from Fresno who identified as Bulldogs who are on the S&Y and probably still claim Bulldog. But there is a large segment of Bulldogs in the general population in the California Department of Corrections. Are they on the yard with Northerners? No. Are they on the yard with Southerners? No. Are they on the yard with whites? Most of the time, no. But are they on a general population yard? Are they people who don't have S&Y chronos and all that stuff? Yes. They're mainline folks. And so to call them dropouts, I think is again, it's part of the propaganda, right? Just like I talked about the propaganda earlier of hey, we were all being abused and we just woke up one day and said, to hell with you, we're going to do our own thing. Also the idea of, hey, they just woke up one day, became dropouts. That's people's own narratives to suit their own cause, right? To tickle their own ears. Um, they're a group. They're a gang. And it's a complicated history, right? If it was so simple and so basic and so cut and dry, you wouldn't have 100 videos on YouTube from 90 different channels talking about all these different experiences with the Bulldogs, different years, different yards. This is how it was in YA at this time, but that's how it was in prison at that time. And it was different in this prison than it was in that prison, and different in this era than it was in that era. And over here, we got along. Over here, we're trying to kill each other. Over here, it's because it was a messy, complicated transition, right? Things are pretty fucking cut and dry now, right? Bulldogs ain't programmed with North and South, period, in the state of California. Maybe that changes someday. Maybe it doesn't. I don't really care either way. I've said multiple times, I'm for anything that reduces violence, but I'm not affiliated. So far be it for me to try to suggest how other affiliated people, run their program. But I just want to clarify that because I think he did a great job as a young person drawing attention to himself. But it's not like there's a million people getting put on platforms with 4 million subscribers from Fresno that get to put on for their city. And I initially was going to point out in the comments how, man, there's a lot of hate towards this dude from people who in the comments say that they're from Fresno, right? Which sometimes you never really know in the comments unless you know that person. People can say they're from wherever, they can say anything, right? It's just an anonymous name. But I was tripping like, damn, these fools really hating on this dude. But then I talked to some of the people that left some of those comments, right? And some of those folks are incarcerated in the general population in prison. And then I started getting a little bit of a different perspective from them and learning more about kind of the history of Fresno and even the music scene in Fresno. So in hindsight, was Faythreehundred the most ideal ambassador for Bulldogs or the most ideal ambassador for Fresno or the music scene there? Probably not. Is that his fault? Probably not. He got a little buzz about himself and he got on, he got in where he fit in. But I just thought I would react to that, but also take it a little bit of a step further, man. So shout out Fresno, shout out the Bulldogs, shout out Faythreehundred, man. I hope he has success in his music industry. But yeah, there was a lot said in that video that has a lot of people feeling some type of way. So anyways, help others move in excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it. Help your community because they need you. And check out Rascal Reacts, man, where you ask for my 2 cents and I'll give you a nickel. Take care.